Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission here is always the same. We take your sources, be the dense research papers, complex historical narratives, or, like today, as surprisingly rigorous technical documents,
Mhm.
and we drill down to find the critical nuggets of knowledge you need.
We do indeed.
And today, we are definitely shifting gears. We're moving from geopolitics to something I think we can call gastrophysics.
I like that. Yes. Our listener sent in a very detailed schematic, let's call it a recipe for what they've termed the ultimate Christmas pavlova trifle.
Right.
And if you're thinking we're just going to read out some baking instructions, you've really missed the point of what we do.
Not at all.
We are performing an architectural deep dive. This is high stakes engineering. Success here is measured by structural integrity and absolutely precise timing.
That's exactly it. The source material is designed to serve a big crowd, 10 to 12 people, and the complexity isn't just in the ingredients, it's in managing the assembly, the logistics, and, well, the inevitable conflict between the parts. You've got this incredibly fragile base meeting the crushing weight and the moisture of everything you pile on top. The goal for us is to understand the structural why behind every single measurement and every temperature setting.
The central mission is synthesis. That's what it boils down to. We
Yeah.
have to analyze how to combine four very different elements.
Mhm.
You've got the dry, delicate meringue,
Okay.
the dense, stabilizing cream, the juicy, acidic fruit, and then this optional but critical, moisture-rich, boozy element.
And you have to get them all into a tiered structure that holds firm for that really critical serving window.
Which means mastering the process, not just following the instructions.
So we have to start the foundation. I mean, if the base fails, the whole enterprise just crumbles. We need to analyze the science of the pavlova before it even gets near a trifle bowl.
Let's get to work.
Okay, let's unpack this. The success of this whole thing, this whole trifle, really rests on what the source material calls the pavlova paradox.
Right.
It says the meringue base has to be, and I'm quoting, crisp and chewy.
Simultaneously.
Yeah. Simultaneously, it needs to be dry enough to shatter on the outside, but then soft and like elastic enough inside so it doesn't just dissolve the second it touches the cream and fruit.
And achieving that texture is purely a product of chemical precision. There's no guesswork here.
Yeah.
We're dealing with 5 key ingredients, and it all starts with the 6 large egg whites.
Okay.
And the very first critical instruction, the first thing you read, is that they must be at room temperature. This isn't a suggestion. It's an absolute prerequisite for structural volume.
Okay, so tell us why. Why is that temperature so non-negotiable for a meringue? A lot of people will just pull them out of the fridge.
And that's mistake number 1. It all comes down to protein elasticity and surface tension. Egg whites are, mostly water and proteins.
Yeah.
When they're cold, those proteins are all coiled up, really tightly bound.
Right.
As they warm up to room temperature, we're talking maybe 20, 22 degrees Celsius, the proteins start to denature. They unfold a little bit. And that flexibility allows them to stretch so much further when you start whipping them.
So warmer whites mean you can get more air into them. Is that the idea?
That's exactly it. More air means more volume, and more importantly, a much more stable volume. The proteins can form a stronger, more resilient network around all those tiny air bubbles.
Yeah.
If you try whipping cold egg whites,
Yeah.
you get a foam, but it'll be smaller, less stable, and it'll struggle to hold its peaks, especially when you add the weight of the next ingredient.
Which is the sugar. And it's a lot of sugar. 1.5 cups of castor sugar, which is also called superfine sugar.
A significant amount.
And the source is really insistent. It says add it gradually, 1 tablespoon at a time to make sure it completely dissolves. So why the insistence on castor sugar? Why not just regular granulated sugar or even powdered sugar?
Well, this is all about kinetics
Yeah.
and structural stability. Granulated sugar crystals are just too big. They
Yeah.
take longer to dissolve. And if they don't dissolve completely, you get a gritty texture, which is, not great.
Sure.
But more critically, any undissolved sugar crystals will act like tiny moisture magnets later on.
That's the weeping that people talk about, isn't it?
It is. That's exactly what it is. The undissolved sugar pulls moisture from the air, and then this sticky, sugary syrup weeps out as the meringue sits. And for a trifle base, that's catastrophic.
Right.
Castor sugar has a smaller crystal size, so it dissolves much, much faster. You maximize the chance that every sucrose molecule integrates into that protein matrix, binding the water and creating that glossy, stable, non-weeping meringue we need.
So what about powdered sugar? I mean, that's technically the finest sugar you can get.
You'd think so, but powdered sugar usually contains an anti-caking agent, which is typically cornstarch. And when we do want cornstarch, we don't want it yet.
Yeah.
Adding it too early in the form of powdered sugar can actually mess with the initial whipping process, and you lose control over the precise amount of starch you're adding.
You want to add it specifically at the end.
Exactly. Precision is everything. So, superfine crystalline sugar, added slowly. That is the gold standard for your foundation.
Okay, stability through perfect dissolution. So once the mixture is thick and glossy and it can hold those firm peaks, then we add the two things that are responsible for that chewy interior.
Yep.
1 tablespoon of corn flour, or cornstarch, and 1 teaspoon of white vinegar, plus the vanilla. And these are folded in last, gently.
This is the moment we shift from pure mechanical volume to chemical resilience. The corn flour is your starch. When that meringue hits the heat of the oven, the starch gelatinizes. It swells up by absorbing water from the egg proteins.
Okay.
And that action prevents the meringue from drying out completely into like a hollow, brittle shell. It's what creates that soft, marshmallowy, chewy center. It's the structural counterpoint to the crisp outside.
And the vinegar, is that for reinforcement?
Absolutely. The vinegar is an acid. It plays two really vital roles. First, it helps whiten the meringue a bit, but more importantly, it helps the proteins coagulate. It helps them form a firm, stabilized structure. It makes sure the protein network is strong enough to hold everything in place without shrinking like crazy when it cools down.
But if you're adding the acid and the starch right at the end, aren't you running a huge risk of deflating that beautiful foam you just spent 10 minutes building?
That is the single highest risk moment of the whole prep phase.
Yes.
If you mix them in too vigorously, you mechanically break all those delicate air pockets you worked so hard to create.
So gently fold is not a suggestion.
It's an order. You want the benefit of the starch and acid, but without the penalty of collapse. You need a rubber spatula, cutting and folding through the middle, to keep all that fragile volume intact.
All right. We've built the foam, we've stabilized it. Now we move to the firing process. The baking strategy is very specific. It's low and slow, but with a critical temperature spike right at the beginning.
Right. You preheat the oven to 150 degrees Celsius, that's 300 Fahrenheit. But the instruction is to immediately drop it to 120 C, or 250 F, as soon as the meringue goes in, and it bakes for an hour. This whole maneuver, it's a highly specific dehydration protocol.
So what is that initial 150C burst actually doing in those first few minutes?
It's doing two things very quickly. First, it accelerates the dehydration of the very outer layer. So it forms a thin, brittle crust almost instantly.
Okay.
That crust acts like a protective shield. It locks in the structure and the volume before the heat can penetrate too deeply and cause the internal air pockets to expand too fast and burst.
I see.
And second, that initial high heat sets the outside before the inside gets hot enough for the sugar to really start caramelizing.
So you establish the shell quickly, and then you just coast.
Precisely. The immediate drop to 120 C minimizes any browning. We don't want a toasted marshmallow here. We're building a stark white foundation. So most of that hour is just spent gently drying the meringue out, preserving its color, and letting that corn flour do its job.
And if you didn't do that?
If you baked at 150 the whole time, the sugar would probably burn or weep. If you started too low, the whole thing might deflate before the crust even had a chance to set.
This precision carries right through to the cooling phase. The source really emphasizes this, saying it's maybe the most important and most ignored step.
It really is.
You bake for an hour, but then there's another 1 to 2 hours of mandated in-oven cooling. The instruction is to turn off the oven, prop the door open with a wooden spoon, and just leave it until it's completely cool.
This is, as I said before, non-negotiable. This is structural trauma avoidance. A meringue after baking is basically a dried-out, glass-like foam. It's held together by rigid sugar crystals and protein. When it's hot, it's expanded. If you pull that fragile structure out into a cold kitchen...
That's the thermal shock.
That's the thermal shock. The rapid temperature change causes the structure to contract violently and unevenly.
And that's where you get the legendary cracking.
Exactly. It cracks, it shrinks, and in the worst cases, it just collapses into a sticky mess. By cooling it gradually inside the oven, you let it gently come down to room temperature over a long period. It stabilizes everything. It ensures it maintains its crispness, and most importantly for our trifle, its shape and resilience.
And the shape is critical because we're not just making one big pavlova base, we're making 3 separate structural layers. The recipe says to spread the meringue into 2 or 3 circles of varying sizes, specifically 6, 8, and 10 inches in diameter.
And this decision is entirely strategic. It connects directly back to the multi-level architecture of a trifle. If you just had three 10-inch discs, the weight distribution would be, well, monolithic. It would crush the lower layers, and visually it would just look like a squat solid cake.
But with the varying sizes.
The varying sizes, that introduces a real sophistication to the load distribution. By using a 10-inch base, an 8-inch middle, and a 6-inch top, you achieve two things. Visually, you get these beautiful overhangs of cream and fruit. It emphasizes the vertical layering.
Right, the trauma.
And structurally, the smaller intermediate layers allow the cream to sort of bulge around the edges, creating natural cushioning and distributing the force better. They act like internal support beams, breaking up the weight so the structure doesn't shear under the pressure of that dense mascarpone.
So we've engineered the base. Now we have to turn to the mortar, the stabilizer, the high-density load-bearing components.
Right, we're moving from the fragile and dry to the rich and liquid-tolerant materials.
Section 2 is all about creating the core resilience. The cream layer has to do something heroic, right? It needs to be delicious, obviously, but it also has to stabilize the entire structure.
Especially because we know for a fact that meringue foundation is going to soften the second we start assembly.
And this is where it's different. A traditional British trifle uses custard, maybe some heavy cream, and soaked sponge cake. This recipe, it throws that out. It calls for a very specific blend. 600 milliliters of double cream and 500 grams of mascarpone cheese.
That is a massive proportion of mascarpone.
It is.
And that high mascarpone content is the absolute key to getting a stable, non-collapsing cream layer in this context. Mascarpone is basically an Italian cream cheese, but it has a fat content of 60 to 75%.
Wow.
That high fat content means it's inherently denser, stiffer, and far less likely to weep or deflate than just plain whipped cream.
So you're blending structure with airiness. Why not just use all mascarpone? Or maybe stabilize regular cream with gelatin?
Well, all mascarpone would just be too heavy, too dense. It would feel cloying. Adding the double cream lets us whip in some air, making it light enough to enjoy while still having the rigidity from the mascarpone.
In gelatin.
Gelatin introduces another timing issue, and you can get a kind of rubbery texture. The mascarpone blend is a natural solution. It sets up firmly in the cold without being gelatinous. It's the high-strength concrete for our construction.
And the preparation here is just as precise. It says you need very cold ingredients, both the cream and the mascarpone, and there's a big warning: avoid over-whisking. You're only aiming for soft peaks.
Yes.
This feels like you're walking a tightrope.
You are. Temperature control is everything for fat emulsions. If the fats in the cream and mascarpone get warm, they separate. When you whisk, you're forcing air into these fat molecules, and they're happiest when they're cold. If they warm up, they lose their ability to trap air, and they just start clumping together.
And that's where the over-whisking danger comes in.
Correct. If you push it past soft peaks, especially with that dense mascarpone, you will break the emulsion. The cream turns into butter, and the mascarpone breaks down into this grainy, oily mess.
Which would be a disaster.
Total disaster. Aesthetically and structurally, the liquid that separates out, the whey, would just accelerate the moisture getting into the meringue layers. Game over. So, soft peaks. Luxurious, smooth, but with just enough structure to hold up the fruit.
Okay, we sweeten this with half a cup of icing sugar and vanilla. But the next layer introduces the acid and the enzymes that are a huge threat, the fruit.
The fruit is essential, though. It's the flavor contrast. You need that sharpness, that acidity, to cut through the richness of the cream. We're dealing with 3 cups of mixed berries, strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, and the pulp from 6 passion fruit.
The berries have a lot of water.
They do, and sometimes enzymes that can affect proteins over time.
But the real threat has to be the passion fruit, right? That is intensely acidic.
It is, and that acid is a major risk to the meringue if you just slosh it on everywhere. But the recipe is smart. The berries give you volume and texture, and the passion fruit gives you this concentrated, sharp, liquid flavor. And it also allows for flexibility. You can add mango or peaches or cherries.
The mango addition is interesting. Does that have a structural purpose, too?
Oh, absolutely. Cubed mango or peaches. They provide a dense, resilient mass. Unlike the soft berries, which just compress, the mango cubes act like little, firm, load-bearing spacers inside the cream layer.
Ah, I see.
They make sure that as everything settles, the cream doesn't just squeeze out the sides, it helps maintain the height and the visual layers. It's structural fruit.
Now we get to the optional, but let's be honest, traditionally critical element. The booze.
The booze.
A quarter cup of Grand Marnier or sherry. This feels like a nod to the traditional trifle. But our base is completely different.
This is probably the most delicate calculation in the entire recipe. In a normal trifle, you want to soak the sponge cake in sherry. That's what makes it a trifle. But here, if we just soaked the meringue, we just dissolve it instantly.
So the recipe forces you to be careful. It says to gently toss only about a third of the berries with the liquor.
This is precision moisture control. You're getting the flavor of the alcohol, that warmth and depth you want for a Christmas dessert, but you're isolating the moisture to a small, contained element. Those tossed berries become little time-release capsules of flavor and moisture.
And I'm guessing the specific placement of those boozy berries is going to be crucial when we assemble it. They're like the deliberate trigger for softening the base.
Precisely. You get the traditional depth of flavor without sacrificing the modern pavlova structure. It's a key insight into the logistical mastery of this whole thing.
Okay, so we've engineered the base, we've stabilized the cream, we've controlled the moisture. Now we get to the final phase of construction, the assembly, and the absolutely critical timing logistics.
This is where timing and placement become everything.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We have to start with the vessel. The source is very clear. A large, clear glass trifle bowl, or a tall, straight-sided glass serving bowl.
The container is fundamental. It's not just a bowl, it's part of the aesthetic function of the dessert. Unlike a cake, which you judge by the slice, a trifle is judged by its cross-section.
Right.
Using clear glass means every single layer has to be carefully placed and visually distinct. You're meant to see the white meringue against the red and blue berries, against the dense white cream. It turns it into a centerpiece. There is absolutely no hiding your imperfections.
So let's walk through the construction sequence. We're using those different sized meringues.
We start at the bottom, the base layer. This is your largest meringue circle, the 10-inch one. Or if it breaks, you use the broken pieces. This establishes the full foundation, the footprint. This is where the most stress is going to be.
Okay, layer 2 is what the source calls the splat and soak. This is where we apply that initial moisture. We drizzle passion fruit pulp over the base and then scatter the liquor-soaked berries only on this layer.
This is the intentional moisture attack. This layer is designed to start the controlled degradation of that base meringue. The acid from the passion fruit, the alcohol from the berries, they penetrate that biggest disc first. If you skip this, the bottom meringue might stay too hard and create a really jarring texture.
Got it. Then, the first stabilization layer, cream layer, about a third of the mascarpone mix.
And this cream layer is doing two jobs. It's support, and it's a moisture buffer. It caps that highest concentration of liquid, the boozy berries, and it creates a solid, level surface for what comes next.
Which is fruit layer 2. Half of the remaining fresh berries and half of the cubed mango.
Notice these are the unsoaked berries. This fruit layer is drier. It's sitting on that cream buffer, so it's less of an immediate threat to the next meringue layer.
And now for the first internal structural reinforcement?
Yeah.
The middle meringue. The medium 8-inch disc, placed right on the cream and fruit, and then a little more passion fruit on top of that meringue.
This 8-inch disc is a critical separation layer. It keeps the supersaturated base zone distinct from the upper zones. It acts like a shelf. The extra passion fruit drizzle here is tactical. It starts the softening the secondary layer so you get a cohesive texture all the way through. We follow that with cream layer 2, another third of the mix, and then the top meringue, which is the smallest 6-inch circle. The structural profile is now set. We're stepping inward as we go up, creating that classic tiered look. And the smallest disc on top minimizes the contact area with the final cream and garnish, which reduces the downward pressure on everything below it.
And finally, the final cream and garnish. The rest of the cream is swirled on top, then the remaining fresh berries and mango, and the last of the passion fruit pulp is poured over as a glaze.
This is the aesthetic crescendo. It's intentionally soft and visually rich. And it's really crucial that this top garnish is added fairly close to serving time because the cream surface can dry out or pick up weird fridge smells if it's left uncovered for too long.
Okay, let's talk about the operational side of this. The recipe gives you a great prep-ahead strategy. You can make the meringues up to a week in advance.
Stored in an airtight container, that's key.
Right, and the cream mixture can be made one day ahead. This is so important for anyone trying to manage a big holiday meal.
It removes so much stress. Baking the meringue and whipping the cream are the two most delicate, time-consuming parts. If you can get those done ahead of time, you can just focus on the final, time-critical assembly on the day.
But, and this is the big but, despite all that flexibility, the source gives an absolutely critical, non-negotiable logistical constraint.
Hmm.
Assemble the trifle no more than 4 to 6 hours before serving. This has to be the core nugget of this entire deep dive.
4 to 6 hours is a remarkably tight window for a holiday dessert. We have to really understand why. It's the scientifically determined sweet spot where the right textural transition happens without catastrophic failure.
Could we challenge that? I mean, what if you, say, painted a thin layer of melted white chocolate on the meringue discs to act as a moisture barrier? Could that extend the window to 12 hours?
It's a clever idea, and people do it with layer cakes, but it creates a whole new problem here: texture. The whole point of a good trifle is that the meringue needs to soften slightly.
Ah.
If you put a full moisture barrier on it, the meringue will stay aggressively crisp, it'll shatter, it won't integrate with the cream and fruit, and you lose that cohesive, spoonable texture that defines a trifle.
So we need controlled softening. We're aiming for it.
Yes, if you assemble it too early, say 12 hours ahead, the meringue, especially that big bottom disc, will completely dissolve. The sugar structure will just absorb all the moisture from the passion fruit and the cream and the alcohol, turn into syrup, and the entire structure will collapse into a soggy, sweet soup.
A total failure.
Total failure. The base loses all rigidity, the layers compress. It's just a single, unappetizing mass.
And if we assemble it too late, let's say 30 minutes before you serve it.
You get the opposite problem. The meringue is too brittle, too hard. When someone tries to scoop into it, their spoon will just clank against the base layer. They'll have to push, and the whole thing will shear and splash the layers everywhere. It won't integrate, it'll separate.
So that 4 to 6 hour window, that's the precise moment where moisture has permeated the crisp exterior, softened the chewy interior just enough for the layers to meld together and become spoonable.
But it hasn't been absorbed so completely that the sugar matrix dissolves. It is the perfect balance of degradation and resilience.
It is the defining insight of the whole deep dive. It's not just how to make it, but when to execute the final steps to get the perfect result.
It's a classic example of logistical timing being just as important as the ingredients themselves.
So we've successfully deconstructed the architecture, we've analyzed the chemical functions of the ingredients, and we've identified that critical assembly window that guarantees success.
The synthesis is clear. For you, the listener, if you're looking for that quick, thorough knowledge, you have to commit to 3 non-negotiables. First, the specialized low and slow baking and in-oven cooling for the meringue.
Right. No shortcuts there.
Second, the strategic use of that mascarpone heavy cream for internal stability. And third, strict adherence to the 4 to 6 hour pre-serving assembly window.
So what does this all mean?
It means this is less about cooking and more about applied food science. And that final little instruction from the source, to keep the assembled trifle covered in the fridge until about 30 minutes before serving. That's another piece of critical timing.
Why that last 30 minutes?
It lets that high-fat mascarpone cream relax just a bit. It takes the chill off, softens the texture, and enhances that perfectly spoonable, integrated feel you've worked so hard to achieve.
That is a wonderful summary of the precision required. But for the learner in our audience, the one who wants to push the boundaries of the source material, let's leave them with a provocative thought, something that builds on the science we explored right at the beginning.
Okay. We spent a lot of time analyzing those dual stabilizing agents in the meringue. The vinegar acid, which reinforces the protein, and the cornflour starch, which binds moisture to create that chewiness.
Right.
Those 2 agents are central to the meringue's resilience against the moisture attack that follows. So given that the 4 to 6 hour assembly limit is so incredibly tight, the question for deeper exploration is this: how might an incremental increase in the ratio of corn flour, say, adding just a half teaspoon more, impact the meringue's ability to bind moisture and resist dissolving?
You're wondering if you could extend the window.
Exactly. Could optimizing the starch content potentially extend that 6 hour limit by another hour, maybe 2? Could it provide a safer buffer for a busy holiday host?
That encourages genuine scientific experimentation with the foundational chemistry. What a great way to look at holiday architecture. Thank you for joining us for this incredibly detailed deep dive into structural dessert engineering. We will see you next time.